Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We okay? Thank you. It's great to see you all here tonight. My name's David Doricott, and with my wife Alison, and along with all the AFD group staff members here tonight, we'd like to offer you a very warm welcome as our guests at Mountain View for the first of our second series of winter talks called Tech Talks. Welcome to also to those joining us on a live stream or who are watching on YouTube at some point in the future. We're so pleased that you are able to join us this way. And in that respect, if anyone prefers not to appear on the live stream or the recording of this evening, could you move to the area to my left, because that area won't be filmed. We're not doing any zooms into anyone, but there is a camera facing backwards that our team might use. We're very impressed at the amount of interest in our solar journey, so thank you for making the time and the effort to be with us tonight. But before we get fully underway, may I just cover some essential well-being items and provide some details about how our evening will proceed. Firstly, please note that this building has two main emergency exits, one here and one at the back, both clearly marked. If in the unlikely event of a loss of cabin, oh no, that's a different one, would you make your way to the main car park that you passed on your way in? Go through either entrance. If you go this way, you have to walk around the building, so that one's quicker. Toilets, including our fully accessible toilet, are located at the rear there, just adjacent to the entry door. If you're joining us online this evening, you'll have to make your own toilet arrangements, I'm afraid. This building is equipped with a hearing loop for those with hearing impairment, so if you have a device with a suitable T-switch, I believe it is, would you make sure that your device is selecting that, and you should find that our sound comes through no problem. Mountain View is a non-smoking site, as you'll have also noticed as you arrived, and that includes all the outside areas. It would be very helpful, please, to provide an uninterrupted environment for our discussions and for your embarrassment if you would now make sure that your mobile phone is turned to silent. I see rustling going on there. So either please switch it off or set it to vibrate if it needs to alert you, or to silent. That would be a courtesy that's appreciated. Thank you. And please note that unauthorized recording or videoing of the evening is not permitted, but the recording of the whole event will, as I mentioned, be available on YouTube shortly after the evening. So, our little teasing headline, free ? Green energy. Right at the beginning of the Bible, God gave mankind the task of working his creation and looking after it. Later in the New Testament, we learn that the whole of creation waits in eager anticipation for the children of God to be revealed. And these are the roots that, as Christians, provide the context for our vision for Mountain View, a place where work, community, and creation are honoured and fostered. There's been much attention in our world in recent years to the need to be far more caring about our planet, and the issue of moving away from reliance on fossil fuels is one of the key themes. It is one thing to have this concern, and this can give rise to many different strategies. Announcing good intentions, even enacting laws, organising committees, engaging consultants may all be important parts of the journey, but they're just not our style. So our view is, though, that for whatever reason, at this moment, the Isle of Man is a long way behind in its adoption of carbon replacement or green energy sources. We believe there's many low-hanging fruit that will enable us to make significant steps on our journey, but there has been quite an inertia. One might even say it's a bit of an institutionalized resistance. So in sharing our journey with what is here the Isle of Man's largest solar energy system, we hope that tonight we can show clearly that our island can greatly benefit from significantly reducing that part of our energy consumption that one way or another comes from oil or gas. We are making available all aspects of our journey, good and bad, in order to encourage others to consider a technology which is not visually, or mechanically intrusive and which provides very long-term benefits. But let's not kid ourselves that any of this journey is easy or straightforward, or even for that matter 100% green. In the same way that making an electric car requires petroleum energy and petroleum-derived materials, so the manufacture, installation and operation of a renewable energy resource still requires a lot of inputs, not least when, even in the north of the island where the sun always shines, it is nighttime or in the dark, short days of winter. If we draw attention to the barriers we've had to overcome on our journey, it is not intended to be whining criticism, but to be that most valuable asset to any individual, business or community, that is, a critical friend. Tonight, we will shortly hear from Martin Coyle of Manx Solar Electrical, who has provided the engineering expertise to design, install and deliver our system. Martin will provide details of the technology and the design of the Mountain View solar array. John Sutherland, our property manager, will follow Martin and will explain some of the practical issues around the installation and operation of our system. And then it falls to me to do my best to justify the teasing title of tonight's event, Free Green Energy, so that others might consider replicating our initiative and benefiting from the bit of pioneering that our team has done over the last few years. After our short presentations, probably just after 7:30, there will be an opportunity for us to take a number of questions, and we hope to be able to answer at least some of them. Please try to keep your questions concise, and we'll endeavour to answer as fully and concisely as possible. If the question you were thinking about has already been answered, please allow someone else the opportunity to ask theirs. During question and answers, we'll have a roving microphone, so if you have a question, please raise your hand so that the microphone can be brought to you. And that will also allow our live streaming guests and those watching on YouTube later to hear your question too. If you are watching on our live stream and wish to ask a question, please use the YouTube active chat to do that, and one of our hard-working team will try to pass the question on to us. In your case, though, please send your chat question when you think of it ahead of the Q&A session so that we've received it in good time. And finally, under housekeeping, may I request your cooperation and consideration at the end of the evening, when it will be inevitable that some congestion may occur. Please also respect the neighbours in the properties around Mountain View as you leave the site by keeping noise levels to a minimum. Thank you so much, and now, Martin, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that, David. So, my name is Martin Coyle. I'm a Managing Director of Manx Solar Electrical. I manage the company along with my business partner, Peter Quinn, who looks after the mechanical side, and I look after all aspects of the electrical side. We are based on the Eden Business Park, Cool Road Industrial Estate, and we are a company of 14 employees. And we specialise in solar PV, battery storage technology, air and ground source heat pumps, and solar thermal. Before we start this evening, I would just like to ask who all here has solar PV at the moment. I know there's a few customers, obviously. Just got a gauge. Okay, it's quite a small number. Okay, that's absolutely fine. When we refer to solar panels, we're really referring to two different technologies. We've got solar photovoltaic, known as solar PV for short, and of course we've got solar thermal. Solar PV is what we're discussing here tonight, which is the energy that produces electric. We've got a little short video, which is on our next slide, which is just the real basics behind solar PV generation. For anybody who has solar, this will be really simple, but for anybody who doesn't, it might hopefully give a little insight into the basics behind it. If we could just move to the next slide and play the video, please.
Solar panels, sometimes known as solar PV, use sunlight to generate electricity. The key part of a solar panel is a thin layer of semiconducting material that absorbs sunlight and converts it to electricity. This can then be used to power electrical appliances in your home. But before it can do this, the electricity your solar panels produce needs to be converted from direct current to alternating current. This makes it safer for use in your home and usable with your appliances. You'll need an inverter to do this, which is a box that's usually set up in your loft. You'll also have a meter inside your home to show you how much electricity your solar panels are generating in real time. The sunnier it is, the more power they'll generate, so duller days mean they'll produce less electricity. And they won't work at night or if heavy snow covers them. Therefore, if you have solar panels, you'll still need to buy some of your power from the national grid. You can also install a solar battery to store excess electricity from your solar panels, but this usually won't be enough to make you completely self-sufficient. Any electricity you don't use or store is then exported to the grid. There are a wide choice of solar panel brands to choose from. To find out the solar panels that impress their owners, visit which.co.uk/solar-reviews.
Thank you. So that's just the basics behind the three main components, being the solar panel, being the inverter, and being the connection to the home. So, to start the Mountain View journey and our involvement in that, which is why we're here tonight, it all started with an email from a Mr. David Doricott back in January 2006, who inquired about having solar installed at his property in Mountain View. And of course, I didn't know David at all and didn't even know the Mountain View site. So we did our own little bit of research and just Googled the address. And to my delight, when these Google images appeared, and we've seen these vast south-facing, beautifully unshaded roofs, I immediately responded to David's email and took advantage of his earliest opportunity of an appointment. We met around about mid-February and we discussed various different items of the infrastructure of the property, the size of solar PV array would be suitable to this property, and we also looked at different aspects of how it was going to go together. We went off and put a report together, full design, costings, and submitted that to David in March 2006. 16. I don't know, I'm looking at 16. That's a long time, yeah. 2016, my apologies. So, after months of different discussions on the whole thing and various different delays, 2016 actually escaped us. And in early 2017, David gave the green light for let's push on, let's get the necessary work done to make this happen. Stage 1 of that was the planning application. Stage 2 of that was getting building control and getting structural engineers' reports. And of course, the final hurdle in it all was getting a MUA on board with tariffs. But we got through all that, and on May 2018, we started the first installation. You can see from the clouds in the sky that the weather wasn't 100% favourable, but we weren't going to lose any more time, and we started with the installation. You can please go to the next slide. The installation moved inside to we installed the SolarAge inverters. There's a number of SolarAge inverters in the film studios next door, and obviously the connection to the infrastructure of the building, which is the main distribution board. The solar panels we used here in stage 1 were the 275 watt solar. They were the panels that was favourable both cost-wise and efficiency-wise at the time. And we used those along with the SolarAge inverters. And in June 2018, next slide please, we finally had the site up and running for stage 1. Very soon after that, 12 months after that, when the first year's worth of energy was visited and we checked the figures and we checked the generation figures against the costings, obviously it was very apparent to David and everyone here that the rest of the south-facing roofs should be utilised. So in the back end of 2019, the process was started again, planning application, building control, structural surveys and whatnot. And then we moved on to, it was July this year that we started to install the second stage. Next slide, please. The second stage, as you can see, covers all the roofs. And there's a little video here that will give a better overall view of the panels on the roofs, because the roofs here are actually not visible for most. These two elevations are slightly as you come in and go around the building, but the two main roofs, which is the film studio and the main office building, So if you just play the video, please. You enjoyed watching that. That has just given us an overview of the expanse of the panels across all the south-facing roofs. The next question that we're always being asked is, what is the maintenance involved with the solar PV system? The reality is the panels on the roof have got no moving parts whatsoever. So there's no maintenance to do with the panels. That the only slight issue is from time to time, obviously with bird muck, can be an issue if we get weeks and weeks of dry weather, which unfortunately, or fortunately maybe, we don't get that. We get an awful lot of rain here that seems to keep our panels very clean. Jonathan has a process in place where they've got a genie lift and they've got cleaning equipment that in the event they need a clean, it can be done. The beauty of the Solar Age monitoring platform system, which you see here, is that not only will the panels actually tell you if there's a fault, so if there's a fault with shading or an actual mechanical fault with the panel fails for some reason, the system will notify the site owner. They will tell them that the panel has gone down, but not only that, this system is very sophisticated that it tells you exactly whereabouts in the roof that panel is. So each panel is individually monitored. That's giving you optimum performance throughout the lifespan of the unit. So that the monitoring software is key, really. Some traditional inverters, they just look at the array as one panel, basically. And if there's a fault with it, you would never know if you didn't have a monitoring system. Whereas this system obviously is giving you excellent detail and just maximises the return of investment to ensure the system is working correctly and is maximum to the end of its lifespan. Next slide, please. So, a lot of time people ask us, why should they install solar energy? And we're very fortunate that we don't go around the island selling solar. Any installations we do is people who's come to us when we deal with inquiries. We don't need to sell solar. We deal with the inquiries that come in. We've never knocked on anybody's door to ask they want to buy solar, nor will we ever start that. So the various reasons we hear from customers of why they want to install solar energy. Some people simply want to reduce their monthly bills, which this will exactly do that. It will reduce your Manx utility bill. Some people want to reduce their CO2 footprint. This will absolutely do that. And some people tell us they're doing it just because it makes them feel better in themselves. They know it's the right thing to do. So regardless whether you're doing it to save money, or you're doing it to reduce your carbon footprint, or you're doing it to make you feel better in the world, all those boxes are ticked regardless of which option you're going for. So that really comes down to a personal choice. That it makes total sense. It makes total sense to us. We started this business here in 2008 on the island. Of course, it was very slow. The island was very slow to adopt back then in solar technology. We had a lot of doors even closed on us, even from a government point of view. They weren't interested really. And obviously over the years that interest grew. We went from installing 1 or 2 jobs a year in 2008 to doing 1 or 2 jobs a week now in 2020. So the need for solar and the want for solar on the Isle of Man is at its highest now that we've ever seen it in the past 12 years, which is obviously fantastic for us. So that concludes everything I've got to say here this evening. Jonathan is going to come up now and say a few words, so let's leave the stage for him. Thank you.
And hi to my wife and kids who's watching online at home and the other viewers. I'm here to talk to you tonight about what the process has been like from the customer's point of view and the considerations we had to make prior to installation, and also how our installation works for us. Firstly, as Martin touched on, we had some considerations to make prior to the installation. When we first met with Martin in 2016, he asked us what was our daily average consumption. And back in 2016, we didn't actually know what our, sorry guys, bear with me, technical issues. Thank you. Back in early 2016, we didn't actually know we didn't have an accurate method of monitoring our energy usage. But we guesstimated that we were using approximately 350 kilowatt hours per working day. To put that into normal terms, that's the equivalent of what the average household uses in an entire month. So we knew that if we were going to get a system, it had to be large to make any sort of significant impact. So the most obvious choice for us was going to be our large film studio roof, our biggest south-facing roof on site. Martin then came back to us with a quote, and we had to consider what else we needed to do. Firstly, I had concerns because we have very strong winds up here, and we had to ensure that both the structure and the fixtures were going to be capable of taking the extra loadings and stresses that may come their way. So we had 2 structural engineers' reports carried out. We also then discussed with our insurers to make sure there would be no issues that they could bring up at a later date, which they didn't. Then we had to go through the planning process, which, as everybody knows, takes a long time. And finally, before we gave the go-ahead, we had to decide, well, we had to find out what tariff would be on. So we began initial conversations with Manx Utilities and quickly discovered that this installation would be by far the largest on the Isle of Man. Initially, and they weren't prepared for that, they didn't have tariffs at that time for such an installation. Initially, they said they would put us on their existing tariffs, and this would involve us incurring 3 additional charges, the total of which would be £4,608 before we even turned on a light switch. So this put the whole project in doubt, and we had to stress to them the impact of their tariffs would make on this project. And if it didn't work on this scale, what scale would it work on? So after some time, Manx Utilities came back and said the threshold would be 50 kilowatt hours. This would mean we could import 50 kilowatts and we could export 50 kilowatts. If we were to export, they would also pay us half the price of what we pay them per unit. It had now been a full 2 years since our first meeting with Martin, and we had everything in order to place the order. Since our first meeting, the panel efficiency had improved so much so that we could squeeze an extra 4.5 kilowatt hours into the same area for the same cost. So we went ahead and ordered our first 234 panels, which, believe it or not, we can count them later, but this is what 234 solar panels. Each one of these panels is capable of producing 275 watts, and it gives a combined total of 64 kilowatts. To keep us within our tariffs, these are then fed into the two 25 kilowatt inverters, and after careful consideration, we went ahead with the order. The array was fairly straightforward to install from my point of view, and on a beautiful sunny day in May 2018, we were ready to turn on the installation. Within the first week, we had already generated 2.5 megawatt hours. Now, I'm going to put that in normal terms, but I'm going to involve you here, guys. It's enough to run one of our electric vehicles outside. Could somebody just guess how many miles do you reckon you could get from that 2.5 megawatt hours that we produced in the first week? Someone take a guess, random guess. Sorry? Oh, it's good, it's good, it's good. It's over 9,000 miles. That would take us from the Isle of Man to Australia in the first week. We're going to stay on that theme of miles as we go along. Now the system is up and running. I regularly monitor the system. As Martin touched on, we have monitoring software. I use two different methods. The first here is the Solar Edge, and this is a screen grab from last Thursday, and it wasn't a particularly good day. I can't even remember it. And for our solar, as you can see on the system here, it tells us that the system produced 228 kilowatt hours, which was offset our daily usage that day by 44%. It wasn't a particularly great day because on this side you can see that this only reached 35 kilowatt hours, and we have the capability of reaching 126, so 35, and yet still we managed to export 4% of our daily production that day. The other piece of software I use is EnergyEye, and this is supplied by Manx Utilities. The EnergyEye software monitors what we actually buy from them. This is monitoring software that's just attached to our meter. Now, on this graph here, this is our base load here, and this is from midnight to 6 in the morning, this line here. Our base load is what we use regardless. Throughout the day, throughout the night, bank holidays, weekends, that's what we use. And it's about 12 kilowatt hours. And as you can see, on this day, to utilize our energy, what we do is we have lots of equipment which is wired up to timers. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, our site begins to wake up and equipment starts to get turned on. And then come 9 o'clock in the morning, we peak at 25 kilowatt hours. It then goes down because this is when the solar is ramping up. Now this isn't a particularly good day. I've got better slides, but I thought I would show you one that went up and down a little. So at 12 o'clock, it's gone all the way down, and it's less than 5 kilowatt hours is what we are taking to run this entire site. And then again, we see the base load as the sun goes down. So we use this software, sorry, let me just note that. We use this software to optimize how we use our energy. And through this, we realized that we had an excess and we were selling back to the grid. As I briefly touched on there, they'll give us half price. So we want to maximize that energy that what we produce, we want to consume it. So we looked at what other things that we could change over. So for example, all the hot water on site is on timers, which is then heated by immersion heaters. Babbage's Bistro is soon to be converted to fully electric, and we have 6 electric vehicle charging points to power our 13 electric vehicles on site. There was additional benefits that came as a bit of a surprise, to be honest. In this slide, this is from the EnergyEye. You see our base load again. And here we can see this is the effect for about 5 months of the year. We don't actually import anything. And then the base load again. So this goes from 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the night when it just starts to come in. Manx Utilities have a tariff which is called the Economy Commercial Tariff, and if it's a split two-rate tariff, it has a peak and an off-peak system. And the off-peak system, if you use 30% of your electric during the period, an 8-hour window from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., they'll let you have that for half price, which is fantastic because, as you can see, through this period here, we're not using anything, and most of our electric is used overnight. So in this graph here, we actually are using 65% of our electric overnight. By making this simple change, we saved an additional £2,500 per year. Hashtag make tariffs work for you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. My kids right now are burying their heads in there. Seasonal variances. One misconception we regularly hear is, doesn't solar only work for a few weeks of the year? Well, you can see here, this shows us through months, January through to December, that for 5 months of the year, from April to August, over 50% of our energy is actually offset by our solar installation. And you can see that January and December aren't great performing months, but it still equates to over 1 megawatt each month for that. Now here's the miles again. Where was the man? I haven't left the answer on the screen this time. To put that into layman's terms, this is still enough electricity each month to power 24 homes for that month. Or it could run one of our electric vehicles on site for how many miles? Take a guess, guys. 1 megawatt hour? Wow, you're good. You're good. Do you have an electric vehicle? Oh, well, there we go. Okay, yes. And that's enough to take us from Ukraine and back. In this site here, this shows us what we are producing year on year. And 2018, as Martin said, we first turned the installation on in May 2018, so this is from May to December. Produced just over 40 megawatt hours, which is fantastic. Then with our first full year, we reached 60 megawatt hours, and this year, with the additional, the second phase, we're now up to well over what 2019 produced. Phase 2. We would often joke that we have another 3 south-facing roofs, and since the first phase was installed, the site has become a lot busier. We have our Badger's Bistro, which wasn't here 2 years ago. We have our Grasshoppers Nursery. We have lots more tenants and small businesses come and join us up here. And we also have started our electric vehicle scheme, which we have 13 electric vehicles on site and 6 22 kilowatt charging points to power them. So therefore our energy usage per day also increased. We're now averaging, and we can accurately say, this is about 500 kilowatt hours. I won't do any miles on that. So we had the same considerations as phase 1. Location, planning, and tariffs. This is what 194 solar panels looks like when they're on pallets. It doesn't look like anything spectacular, but when they're all laid out, they cover a vast area. I know what you're thinking, what about these pesky tariffs? Well, we have the ability to cap our incoming supply at 50 kilowatts, and we have the ability to cap our export supply at 50 kilowatts. And so therefore we remain within the tariff. Then the Economy 8 commercial tariff, which gives us the half price energy overnight. If we use more than 30% during that period, we're actually going to be using even more than that during that period, because we'll be completely, we won't be using as much during the day. So our tariff remains the same. Now, despite having less panels than the first round, we have still been able to double the site capacity. This time we have 194, But these panels each now are 320 watts, giving us a total system size of 126 kilowatt hours. Our record-breaking day so far was in August. This has only been installed just 2 months so far. And we produced 672 kilowatt hours. You're trying to do the maths, aren't you? Go on, spoil it for us. What's the number? 3,600. And I don't know where that takes you, but it takes you a very long way in just one day. I expect with the completion of phase 2, the site will almost be completely offset our electrical consumption for over 8 months of the year. Now, the environmental benefits of the system is that we've saved over 60. This is actually out of date because we ticked over to 66 tonnes just this morning, which is the equivalent of planting just shy of 2,000 trees. We're the very proud winners of the 2019 UNESCO Biosphere Award for Environment. And now I'm going to pass you over to David Doricott to talk about the financials. Thank you very much.
So I'm the typecast businessman who's got to make this a financial justification, because it's one thing and a very laudable thing to invest in green energy because it's the right thing to do, as Martin said, or because you just want to reduce your electricity bill. But can you make the numbers work? And certainly our experience, real experience, not theoretical experience, on our phase 1 scheme is that is very much the case. And what I'm going to go through with you is some real numbers from our phase 1, that's the 254 panels, and I'm going to pick the 2 complete years from June 2018 to May 2020. Could I have that slide? Yep, thank you. Just again, this is a single year. You'll see the almost perfect sine wave distribution of solar generation throughout the seasons. January, December very low, June and July and those months very high. And of course, it's difficult to look at this year's because in the middle of August we doubled our output, so it's made the graph a little bit more difficult to read. So how much did the system cost? And allowing for those structural engineers, a load of administration, applying for planning permission and the time that took, covering all these items of design, supply, installation and overheads, our phase 1 installation was round about £75,000 round sum. So how do we get free green energy if it cost us £75,000? Well, we need to go on to the next slide. And here we see 2 complete years. You'll see they didn't produce exactly the same amount. You wouldn't expect that. Remember, the first full month that the system ran was that wonderful June in 2018 when the sun hardly stopped shining through the day. And you do have good months and bad months. But averaged over the year, we are producing, as you'll see, around about 60 megawatt hours for each year, 62,000 kilowatt hours, 59,900 kilowatt hours, a total actual production of 122,000 kilowatt hours. So what's the financial value of that generation? And again, I'm going to take it over the 2-year period. So if we were buying that electricity at 16.9p, which is the rate you probably pay for your electricity, and we pay most commercial operations without the benefit of the special tariffs that Jonathan mentioned, you're paying nearly 17p a unit. By the way, if anyone didn't work it out, a kilowatt hour is 1 click on your meter. That's 1 unit of electricity on your bill. So if we'd been able to offset actual purchase of the electricity we produced, we would have made just shy of £21,000 in 2 years, remember. If we had sold our electricity, we don't get the same. Jonathan said we sell back to the MUA under their sustainable generation tariff. We sell to them at 9.2 pence, and so that same production would have been £11,200 in value over 2 years. Now, of course, what we have found, and anyone would find, is that there's times when you're generating and there's times when you're buying. And our new software allows us to see what that is. But somewhere in the middle of those two figures is what we actually offset in terms of real cost. And if we move on to the next slide, we can look at how do you pay back your 75 grand? And the answer is, if you're able to burn all the electricity you produce, in other words, you would have bought that amount of electricity, it would take you just short of 7 years to pay for panels that last for 20 years. I'm assured, but they haven't fallen off yet. And on the other hand, if you just felt that as a citizen of the island you ought to set up a solar generating plant and sell all your electricity to the MUI, they would write you a cheque. But it would take you 11 years to get your 75,000 back. And I thought it would be a useful exercise on the next slide. And this, I have assumed no inflation. Remember that energy over the years has gone up in price overall. So one way of looking at our investment in solar is to say that we fixed our energy prices because we've done all the financial modelling in 2016 and 18. That's going to provide generation until 2038, by which time I probably won't be on this platform, I guess. So that hasn't been taken account of, but even without it, in that 20-year lifetime system lifetime design, we would generate around about 200,000, which isn't bad for a £75,000 investment, and then that would give us a net profit of £125,000 with a return on investment of 5%. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to get 5% interest on my money for quite a long time, other than on putting solar panels on my roof. And if we were doing that with selling our electricity to the MUA, the numbers would be lower, but we'd still make a net profit of 37,500, which would give us a return on investment of about 2% per annum. And many of us are not getting anything like that on the amount of money in our bank accounts at the moment. So I thought it would be good to move on and look at what other types of things we could have done with our £75,000 if we happen to have it sloshing around in our bank. If we left it in a bank current account, we should just about get £75,000 back because most current accounts are not paying you any interest. If you work fairly hard and take a fairly long-term cash deposit, you probably get about 1.5% at the moment if you are prepared to lock your money away for quite a while, and we're talking about 20 years here. Then your £75,000 would earn you 22,500. If you were just a little bit more adventurous and you put your money into stocks and shares, but remember the value of investments can go up as well as down, or down as well as up, then you might achieve something like 6%, and your £75,000 would earn you about £90,000 if you get it all back. If you thought about the need, you didn't actually have the money sloshing around to put on your roof into solar panels, but you actually had to borrow it, what does that do? Well, a typical mortgage, if you were able to add the solar installation to your mortgage, so you had free equity in your mortgage and you went to the bank and said, could I borrow an extra £75,000 because it's a good investment? They might charge you 2% at the moment if you get a reasonable deal, so that would cost you £30,000. If you were a commercial business and you had to borrow it at a more commercial rate, it would be £75,000. Now, these are a lot of numbers, but it does say, all of them actually say the same thing, is that it actually stacks up. The only question is, do the panels last 20 years? The good news is that they're guaranteed for 10 of them. 12 of them. They're guaranteed for 12 of them. And in my experience as a businessman, people don't guarantee things if they think they're going to fall apart. And so far, we have had zilch problems in 2 years, even in the very exposed pinch point between Sky Hill and the Northern Plain, which our studio building is. So our real Isle of Man experience, I'm put to you, is that in spite of the fact we're in the northern latitudes, and in spite of the fact that we do get the occasional rain, even in the Northern Plain, and the foggy days and all the others, our actual figures here, just outside Ramsey, are that the money actually works. And our feeling is, looking around, that in our scale of system, and this is, I think, something you need to be aware of, we're talking 254 panels, 160 something, wasn't it, for phase 2? 194 panels. Not everybody's got a roof as big as ours, but if you look around the Isle of Man, there are a lot of roofs of an equivalent size. Schools, cow barns, all those sort of buildings like ours that are steel frame buildings with a cladding section. But in our phase 2 buildings, we put them on the old farm buildings that now represent the Grasshoppers Nursery. So they're on a slate roof, slightly different pitch. So they are installable. When it comes down to smaller scale, maybe domestic type systems, of course you still need an inverter, even for one panel. You still need an installer and an engineer for one panel. So these numbers work at our scale, and I think that's an important questioning. But my instinct is, having gone through this, that upwards of 50 panels would be coming up with very similar figures to ours. And therefore we commend that there. There's a few factors on my final slide that I just want to make quite clear, especially in view of some of the social media postings recently. Nothing at Mountain View, including our solar energy system, has been grant assisted or has come from public funding. I think there is a strong case, if the Isle of Man is really intentional about its drive to eliminate at least some of our carbon footprint by the low-hanging fruit I referred to earlier, that might be the case. But we have actually proven from our figures that it makes a sound business investment, period. The other factor that sometimes might raise its head with certain types of customer or building owner is that VAT is currently chargeable at 20% on a commercial solar installation. I think there's a political question as to whether that should be the case, but I'm not a politician. Well, not very much. Well, go on a little bit. It will cost a domestic installation 5% because that's the way VAT works on buildings in the domestic sector. We haven't included VAT in our illustrations, but there's sufficient wriggle room in the numbers that they wouldn't necessarily make the project unviable. In any way, if a business is VAT registered, the extra cost of about £15,000 might be recovered. Domestic customers on my models would be very unlikely to be able to recover the 3,500, but against a generating potential that we've been looking at, that's a relatively modest sum. So that was a quick whistle stop tour through our numbers and why we think this is really exciting and why we greenlit the second phase. We've now doubled our energy. There's a teaser coming to you because the next thing is, for quite a bit of the year now, we're producing more energy than we actually use, and we're having to sell it at 9 pence into the national grid. But I'll leave that as a teaser for future. We're going to take some questions now. Again, if you're listening online, would you send those through the YouTube chat channel? If you're in the audience, if you'd kindly raise your hand, and someone will bring a microphone to you, and then we'll try to decide who's best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay, start here.
This one's for solar electrical, I think. The installation you've been...
Could you hold the mic to you?
Yeah, sorry. The installation you've been describing this evening is for a particular structure, existing structure, an existing business. Have you had any discussions with the MUA to install a solar farm on the island to connect directly to the grid rather than being connected to an existing building?
Yes, there has been those discussions. There's ongoing discussions with Manx Utilities from various different investors and and companies in Europe who's wanting to come here and do just that on a quite a large scale, and that's ongoing. You might have noticed in the Manx Utilities on the portal, for example, in the minute, the Isle of Man government portal, the Manx Utilities are actually inviting people to come along, and people who can deliver a 20 megawatt farm is what they're discussing at the moment. So that is something that's going to happen on the island. It's going to happen quite soon, I would think, and there's ongoing works with that design stage.
Okay, we have a question from our online viewers. Bob Gokani has asked, the panels seem much flatter than many houses seem to display. Is this just because technology has now changed vastly? They used to be protruding. Is it getting better all the time?
So to answer that, there's actually two types of installations that we can do for a roof. We can do an on-roof system, which is exactly what it says on the tin. That sits about 90 to 100 mil above the existing roof structure. That is what has been traditionally installed for the past number of years. But in the past 6-7 years now, we tend to only install in-roof systems. An in-roof system means that we remove the slates or the tiles, and they sit on actual flashing panels, so it sits inset to the roof, which is about 20 to 30 mil. So that's the two different systems that's currently still available. An on-roof, which sits up on the roof, or an in-roof, which sits much more flush, much like a Velux window, really.
Hello. On the government involvement and development in other places, please could you tell us the total average consumption in the Isle of Man in the winter months? And would it be feasible to take the whole of Derby Airport and put a system in there?
I couldn't actually answer that question accurately of what the Isle of Man's total consumption is in the winter months or any months. That would maybe a question directed to Manx Utilities. You could very easily answer that. To answer your question about the installing a large array down at the airport, absolutely. Absolutely. You can see the scale of this at 126 kilowatts. It's fantastic. You can scale it up to megawatt size farms. It's only going to get better.
Yes. Are there any moves within government to mandate the installation of photovoltaic or hot water systems on new builds? It seems to me that there's a real opportunity here to force a move towards green energy through planning.
Yeah, okay, so there's nothing specifically for solar at the minute, but what the government have done and has gone through that all new builds as of 2025, it's not on the solar side, but they've gone to, you're not allowed to install a gas or oil boiler. It's got to be a heat pump or an electric boiler of some sorts. So that's enforceable as of new build planning applications from 2025, which is very, very soon, of course. It'll be lovely to see that same scenario happen with solar, and we hope it will, but I don't think it's in the cards right at this moment.
We have another question from online, from Nicholas Walker. He's asked, is there a scale of economy to the return on investment figures? For example, is the return on a £10,000 investment proportional to a £75,000 one?
Okay, so the scale of economy on a domestic size installation would be roughly between 10 and 13 years, and that's a size between like 4 and 8 kilowatts of a size of a system for a domestic property. So if you look at that 10 to 13 years domestically, commercially, here the return of investment on stage 1, we know the figures was actually designed around 7.5 years. The actual proof in the pudding now, after 2 years worth of generation, is going to be less than 6. So commercially, you could say that the return of investment is double that of a domestic install.
Am I right in saying that domestic properties don't need planning permission anymore?
Yes, that actually came into force in 2015, whereas solar panels could be installed under permitted development. So that's on existing properties, so long as it's not in a conservation area, which of course you'd have to apply for planning. But if it's a permitted development, you do no longer need planning application for that. New builds you still do, as with all aspects of the build.
On commercial properties, that doesn't apply. So Jonathan mentioned that was one of the big delays in both of our phases, is just the time it takes to get planning.
Considering the weather in the area, why didn't you go wind power? Why did you go solar instead of wind?
First of all, wind power is a mechanical device. It also suffers from both times when the wind's blowing and times when it's not. There are noise nuisance issues too, and the structures needed to avoid wind turbulence would have put the wind propellers, whatever you want to call them, vanes, very high, so you'd have massive visual intrusion. And then there's the question, with the high exposure here, is what would the maintenance be like? And small-scale wind turbines do suffer from maintenance issues, bearing in mind what we've done, we hope, is we've made an investment, we've put something on a roof, and we're going to milk it for 20 years with little attention, maybe occasional, every 5 years, mop it. From our perspective, we're concerned about that. It's not that we won't consider it, and indeed some of the design of wind vanes is developing, and we hope that we might actually explore that at some future stage. But the quick win, the easy win with a long-term minimum fuss system, solar seemed to strike it, and it's just a little bit more neighbourly than a drum beat for people around it. Did you have anything?
I'd like to applaud you for going this direction. This is very good and impressive. My question is for Martin, mainly regarding the design. Like you guys went through a rigorous design exercise. But from what I understand, I appreciate this is an existing buildings. But when you are designing solar panels, say on the Isle of Man, you talk about the azimuth angled, the horizontal. We are looking at about 51 degrees. But this existing building, I'm not too sure what angle that is. Is it something that you guys looked at to exploit the efficiency of solar panels?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good question. The angle, the tilt of the panels makes a huge difference. This roof here is a 5-degree tilt, as is the main office building, and the Babbage's roof and the Grasshoppers roof is about 35 to 38 degrees. The difference in generation on a 35-degree roof would be about 20% more than what a 5-degree pitch is. We did look into the feasibility of installing an angled A-frame structure onto the roof to bring it up to, say, 35 degrees. That would generate an extra £2,500 worth of energy a year, which sounds fantastic, but it would cost near on £10,000 to install that structure. So in this instance, the cost to install the mechanical structure to do that totally outweighed any benefit of doing it. So we went with the angles that was available to keep the panels flush, which is better for wind resistance as well. When you start to tilt things on an existing roof, you create a sail and you put awful stresses on the building, on the uplift stresses of the wind. So yes, you're correct, a more steeper tilt, it will generate more, but when you factor in the cost of doing that, it outweighed it.
Okay,
Just as an addendum onto that, just before we purchased this site in 2014, the roof actually blew off the studio and ended up all around the northern plain. The winds we get here are very fierce, and if there had been one thing that would have stopped us making this investment, and it was one that why we had 2 structural engineers report, is we didn't want that to happen. And if you imagine bringing that mechanical lift up to angle the panels in a more efficient way, we're taking big risks on the strains, because obviously the anchor points would be taking all that strain and transferring it into the roof structure, which is really just a thin steel sheet sandwiching some polyurethane foam and then another steel sheet. So we had this horror of our panels tearing the screws out in one of our Isle of Man feature gales, and not only damaging themselves and the £70,000 we were investing, but also the roof itself. It was something we really considered. We knew that the angle was not ideal, and it'll be interesting for us to see, because now we have 2 roofs that have the steeper angle, just because that's the way they are. Now in phase 2, it'll be interesting to look at them, particularly in the winter months when the sun angle is much lower. I don't think it's such a big problem in the high suns of June as it is in the low angle suns of December. But we'll report back maybe in a couple of years' time to say what it's like and whether those roofs have behaved better than the current one.
Thank you. That's been a really interesting and revealing presentation. I thank you for that. I wonder, have you thought, or do you have plans to take this presentation to government, to the Climate Change Committee that's within DEFRA? Because I think it's this kind of evidence that needs to feed into the plans for the future that might influence planning, might influence grants that would be available not just to commercial but to domestic properties. I'd be really interested to know if that's part of your vision. Thank you.
That sort of sub-politic. I think our approach to begin with was to suck it and see. Let's get some real track record. And as with our electric vehicle fleet, we've kept an open book. We're happy to share with anybody who wants interest what actually happened and how we justified it, warts and all, because there are challenges and there are benefits of almost any investment decision. So, yeah, if we were invited to do that, we were happy to share it anywhere. Appearance fees are very modest.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One, have you thought about putting solar panels across the fields around the place, or are you avoiding that? But the main question, you talked about having surplus in the years ahead when you get your 194 panels in, that you're selling to the Manx utilities at 9.2 pence or something. Would you think about ways that you could store that to use within your own property? Is that
either you're a prophet or you're trying to make me tell you something that I'd have to shoot you after I told you.
Right.
Okay, this is the gen. That's the next stage of our thinking, and as we speak, or not just now but during the day, we're actually in process of installing a Tesla power pack, which will make us the biggest electricity storage unit on the Isle of Man, so that you're right, we won't need to sell it back to the grid, and it'll also mean that we can buy all our electricity at the cheap rate because we can charge at night in winter and put it back in. But again, we plan to share that experience and that journey once it happens. But the batteries are actually here. They were delayed a little bit because of something's been happening last month. Panels on the field, maybe, but it's quite nice to see grass. And the great beauty of putting this stuff on roofs, and one of my sort of slight niggles is, why do we need to make it so hard with planning if we're putting something that's so good on a structure that already exists? Do we need to be to have quite so much of a handbrake on the investment? So if you go up on, as I've done, to look at this place and what it looks like from a distance, and you look over the northern plain from Guthries or something like that, there's loads of buildings like this. They might have cows in them, they might have other industrial and commercial uses. We're building new schools, but are we putting solar panels on them? If you're building a school, I don't know what the new school at Bennahaig cost. Anybody help me there? No. It'll be in the millions. A 75, 80,000 pound solar array. There's not going to be a huge amount to put in as part of that designed in. Somebody mentioned, should planning require this sort of stuff? Well, the technology is here. If you go to England, where, okay, a lot of this has been driven by grants and incentives for owners of all types to put panels on the roof. But if you go around Liverpool, Widnes, all those areas, you get churches with panels, houses with panels, sheds with panels. Everybody seems to have panels, but yet this is what I was alluding to earlier, our island has been slow to adopt this technology. This isn't technology that is emerging, it is now technology, it works. We put it in 2 years ago, we've got the benefit for the next 18 years, probably more. Therefore, yeah, well, why not? But when it comes to taking over green real estate, land's a bit of a scarce resource. I know some of the solar farms have used them for a joint agriculture solar, so you graze the areas between the panels with something like sheep. But I quite like the grass. I think there is probably, as with a lot of national utilities, there is probably a restriction on to whom you can sell it. But of course, we're going to have to face that one if we start selling access to our electricity for charging somebody else's electric vehicle, which we sort of do. That's already happening, and not just here. Could we set up a little electricity substation? I think probably at the moment that would need a political move. Because I think what we have to, I think the elephant in the room for all of us with electricity generation on the Isle of Man is the gas turbine power station that we invested in. We as taxpayers have got a mortgage on a power station that's only halfway through its life. We've ordered it, we can't get rid of it. If we close it down, it'll cost us just as much. So one of the bits of resistance that we understand why it's there is that the MUA have got to look at the payback on the gas interconnector and on the turbine. We could wish it weren't, but it is. And so that perhaps explains why there hasn't been a rush to put more government money into more generation. Let's face it, we've got a big diesel power station in Peel, we've got a hydroelectric system up in the Solby Valley, we've got energy from waste, and we've got the gas turbine, and there's only 85,000 of us to pay for it. That explains to some degree why we are where we are. We do have something that is looking a bit dodgy in the UK at the moment, and that is energy security, which for me as a data business is quite an important asset. It's more important than the utility price. Because if I'm going to put my servers in a place and then I'm not sure whether somebody's going to switch the power off, I'm old enough to remember the times when the power was switched off in the UK for hours at a time, then we have got that. But we have got a surplus of electricity generating capacity on the island, and that must be measured against over-incentivizing, I think. From a political point of view, I'm maybe using somebody else's script, and obviously we've taken a different pathway in our own consumption. But it is a challenge if you're making a political decision to start spending even more money on generation, I think.
Oh, you got the microphone. Go ahead.
You covered the schools before. It just sort of takes the word out of my mouth a bit. To Manx Solar Energy, has there been any discussions with the government about retrofitting the schools? Because it's amazed me that we've had these developments with nothing like solar on them. Do you know?
Yeah, well, the first school to have solar PV installed was the QE2, and that was installed, I think, about 7-8 years ago. Wasn't installed by us, it was installed by a UK company. I have no idea how well it's performing or anything else, but there is other schools now actively looking into solar, and that's going to be coming out in the portal as well. So that is happening.
Thanks. Just talking about domestic installations now, the price of panels has been coming down over the last few years. What's the curve doing? Is it bottoming out, or should we all wait a year or two more for the prices to go down?
Well, buy now.
Yeah.
You're quite right. The cost of solar PV has come down exceptionally in the last. When we started in 2008, the cost per kilowatt supplied and installed then was about £6,500. The cost now for the same size system is around about £2,000. And all our running costs and expenditures have all gone up, as within every business, but that cost has come down. Will it continue to come down? Yes, it will continue to drop. We're actually seeing that in some price recostings even this quarter, that they've come down by a couple of quid a panel, but the price is going in the right direction. And that's all to do with sheer volume. Solar PV has really taken over. There was a number of years in the UK where domestic wind was the market and nobody was really interested in solar. Wind sounds fantastic, but as David touched on earlier, and especially on the domestic scale, there's the maintenance involved with the wind turbines, and everything else, longevity of them is very, very low on a small domestic scale. These big offshore megawatt wind turbines, yes, fantastic, obviously, but all the companies that were specialising in small wind in the UK have in the last few years alone either gone bankrupt, shut the company down, or they've moved over to solar. So solar is absolutely taken over now on a domestic scale. That it's the slower, but it's the longevity of the system. It really is a fit and forget technology.
And what about the inverters? How reliable are they? Because they're expensive to replace.
So an inverter for a domestic system would cost around about £800. The solar age inverters that we install, and we only install solar age, they come with a 12-year warranty as standard, because the only part of a solar PV system that is likely to fail and will fail is the inverter. It's the only one that's got moving parts. So with solar age, for a very minimal cost, we can extend that warranty to 25 years. So there's a 25-year warranty on the entire inverter. There's a 25-year output warranty on the solar PV panel with a 12-year product warranty. The more expensive panels comes with a 25-year warranty for everything, but of course you're paying for that. So yeah, the warranties are right there now, and the solar PV inverter solar age is the only one we'll install.
Hello, I'm Edwin Watson. I have a south-facing roof it's a slate-covered roof, and touch wood, it is weatherproof. If it were to be disturbed by installing solar panels, what are the chances of it remaining weatherproof, which is one of the most important concerns of a householder? Thank you.
Okay, so that's absolutely a very important aspect of installing solar PV. As part of our actual survey, we survey the roof, we check to see what condition it is in, and if we feel that the roof isn't, maybe the felt needs replacing or the tiles, or there's issues with the roof, we'd absolutely get a roofer involved to add those costs into the whole system. Because if we thought that there was issues with the roof, we wouldn't strip it in the first place unless we knew that the issues could be resolved. So generally, I would say 9 jobs out of 10, we'd never have to get a roofer involved to replace any aspect of the roof. Any roof that's less than 25-year-old is generally very sound. But if there was any issues which we would detect during the survey, we would highlight them at that time and factor those costs in to ensure, obviously, that the roof would remain to be weatherproof and not leak for the remaining years.
And we'll just take our final question now for tonight.
You mentioned that in phase 1, each panel created 275 watt, but in phase 2, 320 watt. That's a 20% increase. That's great. Is that technological improvement going to continue in solar panels? Because to me, a solar panel is a solar panel. Can you comment on that?
Yes, so absolutely. The first panels were 275 watts, and the new panels were 320. The reality is the 320 watt panels were available when we were doing stage 1, but the cost for that extra 20% efficiency in the panel then was about 300% more cost. So the reason we fitted the 320 watt on this stage 2 is that the cost has come right down. The reason the cost of the 320 watts has come down is because we can buy now 400 and 450 watt panels, but they're an extortionate price. But their price is right up there, and it was pushing the smaller panels down. So the technology is getting better, the panel getting more efficient, and they're getting bigger. So people think that the efficiencies is due to just the cell. Some of these 400 watt panels are over 2 meters in height and 1.2 meters in width. A standard domestic panel, which I brought one along, is at the back of the room for people to look at. They're much smaller. So the increase in efficiencies is really to do with the increased physical sizes. So that's what the scale of the economy is on the 320 watt panels.
And to add a caveat on the end of that, Oxford University are working at the moment on a 2-substrate panel. So as Martin said, the bit of stuff that converts solar energy into electricity has an efficient light spectrum. But by using 2 dissimilar materials, they can actually up the efficiency of the panels. And they've actually got these in late prototype stage, which adds 30-40% of the output, and particularly improves the winter generation because that's a more blue light. The only trouble is at the moment, because it's such new technology, nobody's giving any guarantees. But it's a case of watch this space. And I've been running a technology business now since 1983. And there is one problem with technology, and that is that the day you buy it, it's out of date. And the week after you buy it, there's something better for half the price. You do have to reach a point with this stuff where you actually put your anchor in the ground and then decide what you're going to do in the next cycle. We've already considered there may come a point if panel efficiency improves enormously where our scarce real estate, i.e. the size of our roof, is better used by shortening the life, expected life of our panels and replacing it with others. We will be able to model whether taking the existing panels off and selling them second hand might actually give us a bigger generating capacity. If somebody comes along with a panel that'll do 50% more on the same surface area, that may be a decision we want to consider. And of course, we'll face that at the time. But yeah, expect massive changes. I thought it would be just interesting to share an insight into a country which will probably not be the first in your mind in thinking about investment in up-to-the-minute renewable technologies like we've been discussing tonight. There's a little known phenomenon happening in Afghanistan where the opium poppy production has massively expanded. And the reason being is that the numbers so work in solar electricity generation that the poppy farmers are buying a few $1,000s. They're getting a loan, probably loan sharks, I imagine. They're getting a loan to buy these solar panels to run irrigation pumps, and the whole Afghani desert is greening up. You can pick it up on satellite images, and the spread is astonishing. Although we're talking about this in a sort of Western industrialized democracy, what you might call subsistence farmers are actually finding that they can keep the water flowing, literally, just by buying a few solar panels and a pump. We perhaps, our drug enforcement agencies would rather they weren't, but they are. And that is just how easy it is to get the technology. The scale of production of this material, it's no longer specialized, it's mainstream. And there's an encouragement there. Well, we've come to the end of our time. We're not rushing off, but we didn't want to hold anyone on. Thank you, those of you who've been watching online. I hope you've felt this worked for you. We have another Tech Talk planned for you, if I can have the slide, if anybody's not gone home. When Branson Bean is coming this time next month, Thursday the 15th of October at 18:45. Same format, there'll be food available if you want to come straight from work. And Branson's going to be talking to us about cash flow. As a businessman, who I think you've guessed I've been doing this for over 30 odd years, there are many more businesses go to the buffers through cash flow issues than do from necessarily profit and loss. Profit is very important, but if you don't get your cash flow running, if you can't get the cash in the bank, you can crash the business. So Branson is going to lead us through some thoughts. Quite a different subject, but I hope nevertheless that you will be able to welcome you to Mountain View. We will write to you. You've all kindly signed up into the Eventbrite system. We won't bombard you with mail. But we will write to you one more time with a feedback form, or at least a link to a feedback survey. We'd like to know what worked for you, what didn't work, any ideas you have about how we make these events even more interesting, with even more famous celebrities on the stage, and any other feedback you've got. If any of you have any ideas for speakers for us, our series is staffed until Christmas. Our November event, Carol Glover is going to come and talk to us about being a maverick innovator as a business. But then in the new year, in January, February and March, we'll have the winter part of our 2021 Tech Talks, and we hope to welcome you to those too. Thank you ever so much for your attention and for some really good questions. We've enjoyed being here. Hope you have too. Thank you.